You ever feel the air change before a storm? That deep hush, like the whole world holds its breath, waiting? That was Earth on the morning everything fell apart. Birds were still chirping, kids still arguing over cereal, radios still humming love songs. Nothing felt wrong, but something big, and we didn't see it coming. Not really. Not until the sky cracked open like a dropped mirror. They didn't arrive in ships. Not at first. They arrived in shadows, in silence, in the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl, where the air feels thick, like it's trying to hold you down. Then came the sound, a low, bone-deep hum that buzzed behind your eyes and made your teeth itch. People all over the world looked up at the same time, instinct kicking in like some ancient alarm clock buried in our DNA. And there they were, massive things, alien constructs the size of cities, just blinking into existence, hovering above the planet like they'd always been there, like Earth was theirs, and we were just squatting. 100 of them, at least, perfect black obelisks lined with pulsing veins of red light, floating in every hemisphere. No noise, no announcement. No, take us to your leader. The first blast hit Shanghai, lit up the skyline like the sun had crashed to Earth. One moment, neon lights, traffic, 1,000 conversations. The next, gone, vaporized, just gone. And that was just the start. Washington, Moscow, Cairo, Sydney, they all fell within the first 20 minutes. We didn't even have time to aim before the world was drowning in fire. Satellites stopped responding. Communication went dark. Everyone thought it was nukes at first, some kind of doomsday scenario. But then the reports started trickling in, barely audible over static. Creatures, 9 feet tall, insectoid, metallic, armed with weapons that sliced through tanks like butter. They called themselves the Vrexel. We didn't learn that name for weeks, but that's what they were. And they weren't here to negotiate. They weren't here to conquer. They were here to cleanse. By hour 3, every major world power was on its knees. No playbook covered this. No war game prepared us for creatures that moved faster than sound and killed like a hurricane. Our jets were swatted down like flies. Our missiles hacked midair and turned around. The Vrexel didn't just destroy. They unmade. Whole buildings disintegrated. Streets folded in on themselves. Cities twisted into smoking craters. People ran. People screamed. People fought. It didn't matter who you were or where you lived. Everyone became a survivor that day. Cops dropped their badges and picked up rifles. Teachers herded kids into basements. Strangers pulled bleeding people from wreckage and screamed at the sky like it might listen. Humanity, that chaotic, stubborn, beautiful mess of a species, refused to die quietly. That was the thing. That was the mistake the Vrexel made. They looked at us and saw soft flesh, saw confusion, saw weakness, but they didn't see what we really are. They didn't see the old fires in our bones, the kind that burned through world wars, through plagues, through loss, through despair. They didn't understand what happens when you back a wounded animal into a corner. Because when they dropped into our atmosphere like gods, they expected us to beg. We gave them hell instead. In Johannesburg, a lieutenant named Mara Voss dragged herself out of the rubble of a collapsed hospital, bleeding from the scalp, one arm broken. No command, no orders, just chaos. She found a comm unit, screamed into it, got static back. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She fought. With a handful of half-dead soldiers and a pack of civilians who'd never seen a battlefield in their lives, she set traps, dug pits, rigged fuel canisters. Every back alley became a death zone, every rooftop a sniper's nest. And when the Vrexel came, they walked into a wall of fire and screams. It was the first time anyone pushed them back. First time anyone saw one of those bastards fall. The footage went viral, at least. What was left of the internet made sure it did. A grainy, shaky cam shot of Mara, one eye swollen shut, hurling a Molotov and yelling, "Come get it, freaks." People saw that and remembered something. They remembered us. The resistance didn't start with generals. It started with bartenders, plumbers, old vets with bad knees and good aim. With people like Mara, the kind who refused to wait around and die. Within a day, whole cities were fighting back. Not winning, not yet, but fighting. And that fight spread like wildfire. Underground bunkers became command posts. Subways turned into supply lines. Every hour we stayed alive was a victory. Yeah, Earth burned. But in that fire, something was born. A rage. A unity we hadn't known in centuries. The old flags didn't matter anymore. Borders were ash. It was just us, standing on a dying world, screaming at the stars, refusing to be erased. And that was the beginning, not of the end, of the reckoning. Here's the thing about humans. We don't go quietly. Never have. You burn our cities. We build traps in the ashes. You silence our leaders. We find new voices in the ruins. You rip the sky open and rain hell on us. We scream back. After the first shock wore off, after the world watched their capitals vanish and their armies crumble, something strange happened. People didn't give up. They got angry. Not the kind of anger that lashes out blindly. The old kind. The kind buried deep in our bones, passed down through fire and famine and 10,000 years of clawing our way out of caves. And at the center of it all, that woman with blood on her face and fire in her eyes, Mara Voss. She didn't want to be a symbol. She didn't care about broadcasts or propaganda or medals. She just wanted revenge. When the footage of her ragtag ambush in Johannesburg started circulating raw, shaky, soaked in smoke and chaos, it wasn't just a win. It was a spark. Suddenly, people realized the Vrexel could bleed, that those towering insectoid nightmares weren't invincible. And once people saw that, the world changed. In Colorado, survivors from a downed airbase outside Denver rallied around a mechanic named Rios. He took old crop dusters, bolted on flamethrowers, and led a suicidal airstrike on a Vrexel crawler. Didn't survive, but he took the crawler with him. They say the explosion lit up the Rockies like dawn. In Poland, a crew of ex-cons overran a patrol with hammers, rebar, and a broken-down food truck. Afterward, they scrawled Hell's Kitchen on the side in blood and engine grease. Served soup to survivors on the same street they'd fought on. No orders, no uniforms, just rage and hot meals. The resistance wasn't organized. Not really. It was messy, desperate, stitched together by spite and duct tape. And somehow, that worked. Because the Vrexel, they were built for control, order, predictable enemies, not wild cards with slingshots, screaming poetry while charging armored walkers. They didn't understand why a species already half dead would keep clawing, keep inventing, keep fighting. They didn't understand spite. But Earth was made of it. In Tokyo, a high school robotics team hacked a construction site's exorigs, turned them into mechs. Kids, barely old enough to drive. They called themselves the Ashwalkers. Took down a Vrexel beacon tower by launching a subway train into it. Full speed, no brakes, just genius, grief, and pure adrenaline. The video feed, blurry, shaky, glitchy as hell, went viral. What was left of the internet made sure of it. These weren't isolated acts. They were dominoes. Every time someone fought back, someone else stood up. One rebel broadcast beamed from a bunker in Nairobi became the rallying cry. You are not alone. Keep fighting. They called themselves the Free Earth Network. Not a government. Not even really a command structure. Just survivors with radios, passing hope like torches through the dark. And all over the world, people started answering. In Brazil, fighters marched into war zones to samba drums and old war chants. In Ukraine, farmers welded plows into flame-throwing tanks. In New Zealand, fishermen turned trawlers into gunships. The oceans roared back. It was loud. It was bloody. It was human as hell. And it confused the Vrexel to no end. They tried adapting, sent in bigger troops, disrupted comms, hit refugee paths. And every time they evolved, we got meaner, smarter, hungrier. Because by now, it wasn't about survival. It was about message. A message written in fire and grit. You can kill us, but you will never erase us. And Mara? She kept moving, from one hellhole to the next. Johannesburg, Nairobi, Cairo, Athens. Every fight she walked into felt like it should have been her last. She bled. She limped. She carried her own rifle and slept on sandbags. Never asked for glory. They called her the Phantom General, because every time the Vrexel thought they'd killed her, she came back. And every time she came back, more people followed. There's this clip, grainy as hell, from the ruins of Athens. A squad was pinned down in a crater, screaming for backup, and Mara steps out of the smoke, dragging a dead Vrexel by the throat. One eye swollen shut, blood streaked across her face. She tosses the corpse and just says, "We bleed them here, or we bleed forever." That line? It stuck. People etched it into walls, helmets, rifle stocks, like it was a prayer. And back home, what was left of Earth's government started scrambling to catch up. Old bunkers reopened. Command structures tried to rebuild, but things had changed. Power didn't sit behind desks anymore. It crawled out of rubble. It aimed a rifle with shaking hands. It refused to die. Trust didn't belong to uniforms. It belonged to survivors. Then came the day the sky screamed back. A Vrexel skycruiser, One of the monsters hanging over the earth like a blade crashed into the Atlantic. Out of nowhere, one minute it was there, next, it was a comet of fire howling into the sea. People thought it was sabotage, divine intervention. No one knew until the signal came in from Mars. Turns out, the Martian colonies were still alive, cut off, alone, but furious. They'd watched Earth burn from red soil, and instead of waiting their turn, they decided to act. Took a mining laser the size of a skyscraper, bolted it to a decommissioned satellite, and fired it like a sniper shot. One hit, one kill. First time anyone had dropped one of those skycruisers. When the wreck hit the ocean, the impact was so loud, it shattered windows in Ireland. And that wasn't just debris. That was a signal. We're still here, and we've got your back. It echoed across the solar system. Earth wasn't just surviving anymore. We were fighting back. And somewhere out there, in the cold dark between the stars, the Vrexel heard our scream, and finally screamed back. There comes a point where loss stops shocking you, where grief becomes part of the air, like smoke after a fire. You don't even notice it anymore. It's just there clinging to your clothes, your lungs, your heartbeat. The silence left behind by the dead, that isn't emptiness anymore. It's rhythm, it's tempo, a pulse reminding you, you're still here. Now make them pay. And that's exactly where humanity stood. Not broken, not defeated, just sharpened, tempered. Heat forged in the rubble of everything we used to be. Every city lost, every scream unanswered, every street turned into a war zone. None of it crushed us. It honed us. And the Vrexel? They still didn't get it. They had the firepower, sure. Their weapons tore through steel like tissue. Their ships owned the skies. Their drones turned entire regions into smoldering scars. But no matter how many of us they killed, how many of our defenses they melted, how many hospitals they flattened, we kept coming. Not in ranks, not in clean lines, in chaos, in waves of fury and makeshift armor, with rebar for spears, Molotovs for missiles, and sheer vengeance where fear used to live. Because death doesn't scare us the way it used to. It speaks our language now. By this point, the resistance wasn't just a movement. It was a species-wide instinct. On Earth, off-world, underground, in orbit, it didn't matter. Mars was online. Luna, too. Tiny rock colonies at the edges of the solar system lit up their signals and whispered, "We're still here." Earth itself had become one massive battlefield. The old nations were gone. The borders, the flags, the politics dissolved into ash. Nobody cared if you were born in Lagos or London. If you had breath in your lungs and hate in your heart, you were one of us. And we were everywhere. In Munich, survivors welded church pews into barricades. In Nairobi, scavengers turned junkyard cranes into Mechlin death traps. In Montreal, coders hacked Vrexel scouts using anti-cam radios and rewired them to explode mid-flight. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't coordinated, but it worked because it was human. And in the middle of it all was Mara Voss, still out there, still walking through the smoke like a phantom. She had no army, no official rank, no base of operations, but people followed her anyway, because wherever she went, hope followed, and so did hell. There's a story, one of the ones everyone passes around late at night, in bunkers, over scratchy radios. Berlin, totally offline, dead zone. The Vrexel had been setting up something big there, some sort of comms relay, probably to jam what was left of our networks and blind the resistance for good. Mara went in with 6 volunteers. No tanks, no backup, just 6 tired souls with backpacks full of explosives and bones full of fury. 2 days later, that relay was gone, burned, shattered. The sky above Berlin lit up like God had struck a match. And Mara? She limped out of the fire, half her suit melted, coughing smoke, and muttered into the first working mic she found. Signal that. 3 words. Enough to light 1,000 fights across the globe. But this isn't a story where the good guys start winning just because they're angry. The Vrexel weren't done. They got smarter. They started watching us, learning from us, adapting to our chaos. Their drones became quieter, faster, deadlier. New war forms emerged. Hulking brutes the size of trucks, wrapped in armor that shrugged off our best weapons. Swarms of Whisper-class scouts drifted into cities and vanished whole blocks overnight. Entire resistance units went dark. In South America, 3 towns disappeared in a single hour. In Indonesia, they dropped something into the rain, something that melted flesh from bone, turned the ground into soup. Genocide, efficient, cold, still didn't break us. Because every time they took something, we answered. A crew in Cape Town built a trebuchet. Yeah, a medieval siege weapon. Launched homemade bombs right into the heart of a crawler tank. Another squad in Seoul rigged a particle accelerator to pulse fry Vrexel tech within 5 miles. Safe? Hell no. Effective? Absolutely. See? They kept looking at us like we were logical. Predictable. They thought pain would shut us down, but they didn't get it. That for us, pain is just a fuse. Take Colonel Zhao. She'd lost everything in the fall of Beijing. Family, friends, her entire battalion. Everyone thought she'd snapped, vanished into the ruins. She came back different, quiet, cold, dead in the eyes, but lit from inside. She started recruiting orphans, amputees, burned survivors who couldn't find a place anywhere else, trained them in silence, gave them masks and code names, and sent them into the dark. They called themselves the Dustborn. No uniforms, no mercy, no survivors. They hit Vrexel outposts with surgical brutality, cut down enemy ranks like scythes through wheat, left alien bodies strung up like warnings, carved 3 words into every wall they passed. We see you. The Vrexel tried to bait them, hit civilian convoys, torch refugee lines, thought it'd draw the Dustborn out. They were right, but not how they expected. The Dustborn didn't come for vengeance. They unleashed it. Within a week, they'd gutted 5 major alien strongholds, burned one to the ground with napalm stolen from a Vrexel ammo convoy. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were Wrath. This was Earth now, a planet running on pain and persistence. No central command, no big wins. But every day we hurt them. Every ambush, every trap, every human who stood their ground and refused to fall, that chipped away at the myth of the Vrexel, made them hesitate, made them afraid. And fear, in war, is a crack, a whisper of doubt in an otherwise flawless machine. And cracks, that's where humans live. There's a story from the Sao Paulo front, one of the worst firefights on record. A street-by-street bloodbath, close quarters, no cover, just carnage. A teenage girl, barely old enough to remember peacetime, killed a Vrexel brute with nothing but a rebar spear and a jug of acid, lost her arm in the process, refused evac, just stood over the corpse, shaking, crying, but still defiant. She lived, and her story? It spread, not because she was strong, but because she was real, because she bled and screamed and kept fighting anyway. That's what it meant to be human now. Not fearless, not invincible, just relentless. The Vrexel wanted obedience. We gave them resistance. They wanted extermination. We gave them hell. Because you don't get to erase a species that writes its stories in blood and builds its history out of ash and broken teeth. Because death might be the end for others, but for us, it's just the start of a new war cry. There's a moment in every war when the rage burns out, when even the bloodlust cools, and all that's left is exhaustion, a kind of silence, not peace, just the kind that settles in after screaming too long, like your voice gave out, but your heart still wants to roar. That's where Earth was now. We've been fighting in the ruins for months, long enough that kids couldn't remember what blue skies looked like, long enough that we started measuring time by battles, not calendars. Before Shanghai fell, after the second Dustborn uprising, during the blood rain in Caracas, we weren't winning. Not really, but we weren't dying out either, and that meant something. The Vrexel still didn't understand us. They were logic, efficiency, cold precision. They studied us like we were a problem to solve, and that was their mistake. Because we weren't a problem, we were a threat. Somewhere outside what used to be Istanbul, 3 warlords sat in a crater that used to be a football stadium. The place was half collapsed, full of dust and broken seats, the kind of place where echoes linger longer than they should. These 3 weren't politicians. Not anymore. Not after everything. One had been a rebel general in the Balkans. One was a tribal chieftain from the West Sahara wastes. And the third, she was Maravas. Yeah, that Mara. Phantom General. Firewalker. The one who dragged a Vrexel outpost to hell with a half-dead squad and a crate of homemade bombs. They didn't talk about old borders, or who used to own what. None of that mattered anymore. The only question was this: how do we stop bleeding and start hurting them back? That's where the Ash Pact was born. Not on paper, not in speeches. In dirt and blood, and the burnt air of a city that forgot what hope felt like. The Ash Pact wasn't a treaty. It wasn't a fancy name for an alliance. It was a promise, sworn by firelight, between survivors. No more silos. No more scattered factions. No more fighting alone in the dark. Every resistance group, no matter how small, would share intel, trade weapons, sync comms, coordinate raids. We wouldn't be nations anymore. We'd be a pack. Hungry, angry, unified. First thing the pack did, it put Mara in charge of strategy. Not command, She didn't want that. But she could see things, patterns, weaknesses, and more importantly, she knew how to inspire the broken. She called it Operation Fire Nest. The idea was insane. It had to be. They were going to hit a Vrexel Forge node. Think of it like a heart. A floating factory/fortress, orbiting low and dumping fresh troops like it was raining death. No one had ever touched one. The last time someone tried, they vanished mid-atmosphere. Just blinked out. No distress call. No debris. Suicide. So naturally, Mara picked that as her next target, because she knew one thing the Vrexel didn't. When humans lose everything, they get creative. The Ash Pact mobilized like a hive on fire. In Antarctica, engineers fired up an abandoned weather control station and converted it into a stealth launch pad. In India, rogue AI clusters were coaxed back online to run predictive simulations. In what was left of France, they found an old orbital cannon buried beneath a collapsed satellite base. Half crushed, barely functional. Didn't matter. We used everything. Scavenged parts, scrapped ships, human will and Martian tech. The plan was simple. Get close enough to the Forge node to upload a virus. Shut it down from the inside. The hard part? Getting close. They built the ship in pieces, called it the Howler. Not because it was sleek or fast. It wasn't. It was loud. Loud like pain. Loud like vengeance. You could hear its engines growl before you saw it. Armor patched with melted Vrexel plating. Hull reinforced with bones of ships that had fallen before. When the Howler lifted off, every radio across the Resistance lit up. This is Earth. This is your mistake. That message looped on repeat. A war cry on every frequency. They expected to lose everyone on board. Hell, even the pilots knew it. But the Howler didn't go alone. 30 fighters rode in its shadow, converted cargo drones, mech gliders, even one stolen Vrexel scout ship flown by a Ukrainian tech crew that barely knew how to keep it in the air. The closer they got to the node, the weirder space got. Lights bending, time stretching. Vrexel defenses warping reality like bad dreams. They lost 12 ships before even reaching the perimeter. But the Howler didn't slow down, because inside it was a kid. A coder from Lagos named Whale, barely 19, used to program indie games before the world went to hell. Now, he was humanity's last chance at jamming a spike of corrupted code into the Vrexel's war guts. He'd rewritten the virus 100 times, tested it in underground labs, simulated it on leftover Vrexel scraps. It wouldn't destroy the Forge node, but it would freeze it. By Earth time. Time meant survivors. Time meant revenge. The final run looked like madness. Ships burning, pilots screaming, the Howler taking hits so loud you could feel them through comm static. And then silence. Long, too long. Then Whale's voice came through. Soft, shaking, but alive. Upload complete. And then the Forge node went still. No explosion, no lights, just quiet. Heavy, terrifying quiet. And then, one by one, the troop drops stopped. Across half the globe, Vrexel reinforcements stopped falling. For the first time since the war began, we made them bleed time. Whale didn't make it out. No one on the Howler did. But when people talk about him, they don't talk about death. They talk about the silence, the quiet that followed. The moment the sky, always humming, always threatening, finally paused. We didn't win the war that day, but we showed them this. We could reach them. We could hurt them. And if we could do that once, we'd do it again. The Ash Pact held. Mara disappeared again. No surprise. Some say she was wounded. Others say she's building something bigger. What matters is the spark. The pact made us a pack. And a pack? A pack doesn't beg. It bites. You ever look up and realize the stars aren't watching you anymore? That's what the sky felt like now. Not distant, not peaceful, just heavy. It wasn't stars we saw anymore. It was them. Vrexel warships. Cold things made of hate and algorithms. They didn't float. They loomed. Like vultures circling a battlefield that hadn't even gone cold yet. You could see them sometimes at night, blocking the constellations we used to wish on. We used to call the sky a blanket. No, it was a cage, and someone needed to tear a hole in it. That someone was Commander Emil Drazek, born in the Siberian snow, raised in war, carved by loss. His voice sounded like gravel being chewed by thunder. His face? Like it forgot how to smile back when birthdays still mattered. But when he spoke, people moved. He wasn't famous like Mara. Didn't need to be. He wasn't fire. He was pressure. Quiet. Relentless. The kind of guy who didn't lead from behind desks. He led from the front, through smoke and gunfire and screams. He commanded a unit that didn't officially exist. They were called the Skybreakers. Now, the Vrexel didn't just kill. They harvested resources, biomass, data, everything. They had these orbital skimmers that dropped from low orbit like spears, sucking the ground dry of anything useful. One of them, Harvester Sigma 9, was targeting what was left of the African Rift colonies. That region had become a lifeline. Solar farms, resistance bunkers, medical networks. If Sigma 9 got to it, the war was over. No more power, no more medbays, no more anything. So Command gave Drazek the impossible order: destroy the Harvester. No reinforcements, no air superiority, no cavalry, just the Skybreakers. They had one shot. One. See, most human weapons bounced off Harvester plating like rain on steel. But there was this old experimental cannon buried beneath what used to be Cairo. A relic from before the collapse. Big, nasty, dangerous as hell. Hadn't been fired in years. They called it the Goliath Lance. Nobody knew if it even still worked. Didn't matter. They were going to make it work. Drazek and his team went underground. Literally, they had to tunnel through collapsed streets, alien patrols, and radiation fields just to reach the damn thing. Took them 5 days to get there. They lost 2 people before they even saw the barrel. But when they found it, it was like staring at a god's discarded sword. Rusted, giant, and humming with something that felt wrong. The tech wasn't entirely human. That's the part no one ever talks about. Back before the invasion, there were rumors, classified files, black site experiments, whispers of contact. Some believed Earth had found something else and tried to build weapons from it. The Goliath Lance was one of those whispers made real. Alien-human fusion, power that didn't belong in our hands. But when the sky is falling, you pick up anything sharp. The Skybreakers worked in silence, rewired the core, recalibrated the aim, replaced conduits with scrap and prayer. Drazek stood watched the whole time, never sat, barely blinked, just stared upward like he could see the Harvester even through layers of dirt and stone. He didn't speak until the night before the shot. And when he finally did, he said one thing: if we miss, fire again. If we die, aim higher. The Harvester came at dawn. It dropped like judgment, slow, silent, monolithic, like a mountain sliding down from heaven. The earth trembled, the sun disappeared, and deep below the ruined city, the Skybreakers locked the Goliath into place. The cannon had no targeting system, no AI, just manual bearings and luck. Whale's virus team had sent coordinates. They only had one window, a 12-second shot before Sigma 9 activated its orbital shields. One chance, one pull of the trigger. The Goliath roared. Not fired, roared. A sound like a world screaming. The beam punched upward like a spear of white-hot vengeance. It cut through dust, concrete, air, and hit the Harvester dead center. The shield flickered, then failed, and the sky burned. Sigma 9 didn't just explode. It collapsed, like it folded in on itself. A star imploding in slow motion. Light cracked across the clouds. The kind of sound that made birds fall out of the air. The kind that rattled bones and made grown soldiers drop to their knees. For 10 seconds, the sky wasn't black anymore. It was fire. And in that fire, humanity carved its name again. The Skybreakers didn't get out. No way to escape the feedback surge. Goliath melted from the inside. The tunnels collapsed. No signals came back. But their legacy? It echoed. The Vrexel felt it, heard it, knew it. For the first time, one of their harvesters, untouchable, sacred, engineered to be immortal, had been killed by primitives. And the rest of the galaxy? They started watching. Some in curiosity, others in fear. Because if Earth could do that with one half-broken cannon and a dozen stubborn ghosts, what else were we capable of? Drazek's name was whispered like scripture after that. Not because he survived, but because he didn't. Because he looked up at an impossible enemy and fired anyway. And because his death told every resistance fighter around the world one simple truth: the sky can bleed. After that, people stopped hiding. Cells in Norway activated old deep-sea launch tubes and aimed at orbital targets. Pacific Nomad fleets emerged from the waves and launched anti-air missiles from converted fishing rigs. Even kids started looking up not with fear, but with fire in their eyes. The black sky wasn't sacred anymore. We had cracked it, set it on fire. And the Vrexel? They stopped hovering. They started retreating higher, shielding themselves, adapting. That hesitation? That meant we'd won something. Not the war, but the right to keep swinging. There's this myth people used to tell in the early days about how wolves were hunted to the edge of extinction, then came back stronger, meaner. Not because they were given a second chance, but because they took it. That's how Earth felt now. Like the wolves were back. After the Goliath fired and burned a hole in the sky, everything changed. Not all at once, There was no sudden victory, no cheering in the streets. We were way past celebrations. But that silence, the one that followed the destruction of Sigma 9, it was loud in all the right ways. It was fear, not ours, theirs. For the first time, the Vrexel started second-guessing themselves, not retreating, but hesitating, adjusting. And in that hesitation, we smelled blood. The Ash Pact began to evolve. It wasn't just an agreement anymore. It was becoming a machine, a living, breathing network of survivors, fighters, builders, hackers, and ghosts, each part moving with brutal precision. No one was in charge, and that was the point. This wasn't a war fought from war rooms. It was being written in graffiti, in coded transmissions, in blood on shattered walls. It was happening in tunnels, in forests, in shattered husks of cities that no longer had names. It was happening everywhere. There was one unit, the one they never put on the record. No insignia, no ranks, no official names. They called themselves the Wolves. Nobody really knew where they started. Rumor was they came from what used to be Alaska. Others said Siberia. Doesn't matter. What matters is what they did. They didn't fight like an army. They fought like a pack. Fast, quiet, ruthless. They hunted the hunters. The wolves didn't take orders. They heard whispers. Someone would mention a supply route that went dark. A Vrexel outpost broadcasting strange signals. And then, silence. A week later, that outpost? Gone. Radio static. Black smoke. Carved into the walls in every known language. We remember. They didn't ask for credit. Didn't leave survivors. Just scars. The Vrexel tried to track them. Failed. Tried to bait them. Lost more ground. See, the wolves didn't just kill. They dismantled. They turned fear into a weapon. They were the myth that walked in the dark. Now, the pack didn't always trust them. Some leaders thought they were unstable, rogue, too violent. But when you're trying to gut an enemy that breeds logic and bleeds code, you don't send diplomacy. You send wolves. And when the pack needed a foothold in the northern cradle, a Vrexel stronghold buried under what used to be Greenland, they called for the wolves, not to fight a battle, to start a war. The cradle wasn't just a base. It was a breeding facility, a forge where Vrexel soldiers were grown, programmed, deployed. One of the few left since Whale's virus started corrupting their replication matrix, which meant if the cradle fell, the Vrexel would feel it, deep. And the wolves were the only ones crazy enough to try. They moved in with blizzards at their back. No heavy weapons, no drones, just silence, thermals, and a language of hand signals that said more than any speech ever could. They infiltrated the edge of the cradle in under 2 days, and what they found was worse than expected. Not machines, hybrids, humans twisted into something else, spliced with Vrexel code, used as biomass, repurposed into scouts and bait and bombs. It wasn't just warfare, it was desecration. That night, the wolves sent one transmission, just 5 words. They are breaking the dead, that's all. And then, nothing. For 3 days, no one heard from them. The pact assumed the worst. But then, on the 4th day, the sky above the cradle lit up in blue flame. The kind that doesn't come from bombs, but from core detonations. The wolves had reached the central chamber, planted explosives in the forge veins, fought their way out through shrieking, half-made Vrexel horrors. Only 4 of them survived. But the cradle? Gone. Glass and ash. That loss hit the Vrexel like a nerve strike. The cradle was sacred, efficient, flawless. To have it broken, not by an army, but by a handful of humans, was something their logic couldn't process. And for us, it was proof. Proof that we could strike deep. That the myth of Vrexel invincibility was just that, a story we'd been fed too long. Now we were writing our own. The wolves didn't stick around for medals. They vanished into the snow, left behind nothing but the bodies of the fallen and those 5 words, etched into steel wreckage. We remember, and the world did. After the cradle, resistance efforts exploded. In New Delhi, engineers developed cloaking fields for ground squads using salvaged Vrexel optics. In Chile, old orbital mirrors were repurposed into solar weapons, scorching supply routes from miles away. We weren't adapting anymore. We were innovating, not just surviving, evolving. And the Vrexel? For the first time, they started to feel small. Not because they had less, but because we had more. More pain, more fury, more of that sick, beautiful human spite that refuses to be erased. There's a clip that goes around, broadcasted from a hidden outpost in Mozambique. A young girl, maybe 9 or 10, standing next to a shattered crawler engine, covered in soot. She looks into the camera and says, "They took my parents. I took their legs." She smiles. Behind her, the crawler's still smoldering. This is who we are now. Not soldiers, not rebels, not even survivors. We are wolves. We are fire. We are the nightmare that hunts in the cold, in the silence, in the places they thought we'd never reach. We are what happens when you try to burn a species that knows how to live in the ashes. And if the Vrexel thought the wolves were bad, they hadn't seen what was coming next. Because Earth wasn't just resisting, it was mobilizing. You ever wonder what happens when the night gets too dark? When the silence stretches so long your own heartbeat sounds like a thunderclap. That's when shadows start to move, not just around you, but inside you. When fear doesn't paralyze you, when it sharpens you, makes you remember who you really are. Because sometimes, the darkest moments don't break us, they ignite us. After the wolves tore down the cradle and burned blue fire into the frozen north, the war changed. It went from endless firefights on ruined streets to something deeper, more cunning. The Vrexel learned. They adapted. They stopped throwing tanks and thunder down on us. Instead, they sit in the shadows. See, the Vrexel had their own ghosts, silent killers who didn't need blasters or brute force. These weren't machines. They were assassins, mutated, bred for one purpose, to stalk and silence. Humanity called them the Shade Walkers. They moved like smoke through broken cities, unseen, unheard, untouchable. They weren't just hunting leaders or soldiers. They hunted hope. It was in the ruins of Tokyo where it all went wrong. Resistance Cell Omega 13 had been strong, tight-knit. They held the east side, repelling patrols and keeping hope alive in a city that had forgotten sunlight. But then the Shade Walkers came. No warnings, no shots fired, just disappearance. One by one, fighters vanished without a trace. Communications cut off, only static left behind. Omega 13 was erased like a line of chalk in the rain. That hit Earth hard, because it wasn't just a loss of fighters. It was a loss of faith. Mara Voss heard the news first. She didn't curse. She didn't scream. She listened, because that's what leaders do when everything's on fire. She gathered survivors from the ashes and whispered into dark rooms, into hushed voices, into hearts still trembling. Shadows are just light without a home. Her meaning was clear. We had to become the light. That meant change. The resistance couldn't just fight fire with fire anymore. It needed something smarter, quieter, deadlier. Mara's answer was the Nightfall Initiative. It wasn't just a new squad. It was a new way of war. A collective of scouts, hackers, and guerrilla fighters who would slip through the cracks of the Vrexel's terror. They were ghosts in the machine, turned hunters instead of hunted. The Nightfall Initiative used everything. Old subway tunnels in New York, hidden catacombs beneath Paris, deserted temples in Cambodia. They learned the art of silence, of invisibility, and when they struck, they did it like whispers. There was a raid in Marseilles that became legend. A Nightfall team slipped into a Vrexel data hub deep in the sewers. No alarms, no shots fired. They hacked the core, shredded the enemy's intel, and left before the Vrexel even knew they'd been there. And the best part? They took a dozen Shadewalkers' DNA samples. Proof that these monsters could be tracked. That proof sparked hope. Hope turned to plans. Plans turned to strikes. And the war shifted. The Vrexel were still strong, still brutal. But now, we were unpredictable. In the months that followed, the Nightfall Initiative became a whisper network. They sabotaged supply lines. They assassinated key commanders. They stole research that let human scientists reverse engineer Shadewalker bioweapons. Earth was turning their own terror against them. Even regular civilians began to resist. A schoolteacher in Buenos Aires rigged a radio to jam enemy signals. Farmers in Ukraine dug trenches and planted mines. Kids in refugee camps hacked alien drones to drop leaflets, messages of resistance, proof that we weren't done fighting. And through it all, Mara kept moving, a shadow herself, showing up where hope was weakest. She stitched broken groups together, turned rumors into strategy, made sure that no one was alone. Because this war, it wasn't just about guns and bombs. It was about connection. There was a moment, one cold night in what used to be Cairo, when Mara stood on the rooftop overlooking a sea of fires and broken buildings. Behind her, soldiers and civilians gathered, tired and scared. But she looked at them and said, "They want us to be afraid, to break." But the night only grows deeper before dawn. Her voice wasn't loud. It was quiet, but it carried. That night, the fires burned brighter, because we learned to fight not just the Vrexel's weapons, but their shadows. And the shadows? They learned to fear us. That's what it means when shadows rise. It means the light pushes back harder, because the darker it gets, the fiercer we fight, War is a horizon you never stop chasing. No matter how far you run, no matter how many battles you win, it always waits there, red and relentless, bleeding light into the sky like a wound that won't heal. By now, humanity wasn't just fighting to survive. We were fighting to reclaim that horizon, to make it ours again. The war had carved deep scars into the world. Cities were skeletons draped in ash. Oceans carried the echoes of shattered fleets. And the sky, well, the sky was still thick with Rexel warships, but they were different now. Wounded, cautious, because we were no longer the prey. We were the hunters. At the center of this shift was Captain Lena Ortiz. From the moment she joined the resistance, she was fire. Not the loud kind, never shouted or stormed into rooms, but the kind of fire that melts ice with just a steady gaze. She grew up in Rio de Janeiro's favelas, learning early how to survive in chaos. Lena didn't just command troops. She commanded respect, and more importantly, she earned it. Her unit, the Red Suns, was humanity's spear, a mobile strike team that specialized in deep infiltration. Wherever the Vrexel thought they were safe, the Red Suns went hunting. Their latest mission? A critical one. The Vrexel had established a forward command post on Titan. Yes, Titan, one of Saturn's moons, far from Earth's reach, deep in the frozen haze. It was a fortress, cloaked, heavily guarded, and nearly impenetrable. From there, the Vrexel controlled supply chains, troop movements, and, worst of all, the brutal enforcement of their rule in the outer colonies. Destroying that outpost meant crippling the Vrexel's grip. It meant a chance to take back the solar system. But it wasn't going to be easy. Lena's team trained for months in underground bunkers beneath former Brazilian mines. They adapted, pushing human limits. No gravity, no atmosphere, no mercy. Every move was rehearsed, every scenario anticipated. Because this wasn't just a mission, it was a suicide run. When the Red Suns launched, the world held its breath. Their ship, the Ember Hawk, sliced through the void like a blade forged in desperation. Silence was their ally. They drifted into Titan's orbit, cloaked and unseen. Once on the surface, the frozen landscape was brutal. Bitter winds that could freeze your blood. Low gravity that twisted every step into a challenge. And beneath the ice, the Vrexel stronghold, the Red Suns moved like shadows. Silent but deadly. Every corner held danger. Every shadow, a potential death trap. And then it happened. The ambush. Vrexel reinforcements pouring from hidden tunnels. Blasters firing like lightning storms. Red Suns fighting back with all they had. Explosions lit the dark ice fields like a dying star. Lena took a hit early. A shard of plasma tore through her side. But she didn't fall. She kept pushing forward, led her team deeper into the fortress. Because there was something worse than death. Failure. Inside the command center, they found the heart of the beast. Servers buzzing with stolen human data. Maps detailing resistance movements. And most importantly, the controls for the suppressor array. A weapon that kept Earth colonies in crushing silence. Destroying it would mean chaos for the Vrexel. Communications would falter. Supply lines would collapse. Resistance cells would get breathing room. Lena's team rigged the servers with explosives. But as they prepared to leave, the fortress shook. Self-destruct sequence initiated. Panic surged. Explosions thundered. Debris rained like fire. Red Suns ran, leapt, scrambled. Lena's injury slowed her. Her vision blurred, but her resolve burned brighter than ever. She helped her teammates escape, last to leave the crumbling facility. As the Ember Hawk lifted off, the fortress exploded behind them, a plume of fire against Titan's frozen night. Back on Earth, the world watched the news feeds in silence. The Red Suns had done the impossible. They had struck a blow that echoed across the stars. But it came with a cost. Lena survived, but barely. Her wounds were deep, her body broken, but her spirit unbreakable. Her story became a beacon, proof that even when blood paints the horizon, we don't turn away. We face it. We burn through it. Because this war, it's not just about winning. It's about refusing to quit, refusing to let the darkness claim what's left of us. Lena's words, whispered in a hospital bed, carried through the world. They think we bleed to die, but we bleed to live, to fight, to remind the universe that humanity refuses to fade. And the horizon? It was ours to chase. Thought there's a moment in every war when you realize it's not just a fight anymore. It's a reckoning, a crossroads. Because you don't just fight for land or power. You fight for everything you've ever been, for every memory, every scar, every breath. By the time the Red Suns returned from Titan, battered but burning with victory, Earth was on its knees. Cities smoldered under Vrexel control. Families torn apart. Hope stretched thin. But something was different now. The fire inside us refused to die. It flickered, yes, but it never went out. The Ash Pact gathered in what used to be Cape Town, a ruined city turned fortress. Leaders from every corner of the globe, survivors, fighters, dreamers. Among them stood Maravas, the Phantom General, the woman who had led us from whispers into war. She didn't look like a hero. No medals, no parades, just tired eyes that burned with an unspoken promise. We end this. The plan was desperate, because desperation breeds genius and madness. The Vrexel had built a fortress in orbit, a massive ship, a mobile war machine they called the Oblivion. It was their crown jewel, the tip of their spear aimed straight at Earth. Destroying the Oblivion would cripple the enemy's entire war machine, cut off reinforcements, cripple their control, give humanity a chance to breathe. But it was guarded by fleets of warships, by technology that bent reality, by soldiers bred to be merciless. And so, we planned a final strike. The fleet was assembled in silence, old ships patched with new tech, pilots with nothing left to lose, every eye on the horizon, every heart pounding with the weight of a dying world. Among the pilots was Lieutenant Jax Harper, a fighter born in the ruins of Detroit, raised on stories of human stubbornness. His mission was simple: get inside the Oblivion, plant explosives, get out. But war never follows a simple plan. The battle erupted like a storm, laser fire slicing through the void, ships weaving and diving, explosions blooming like deadly flowers. Jax's squadron fought with a desperation only those with no tomorrow can muster. They broke through the first line, dodged plasma storms, faced down enemy fighters that moved faster than thought. Inside the Oblivion, Mara led a team of commandos, silent and deadly. They moved through corridors that smelled of oil and death, every step bringing them closer to the heart. But the Vrexel were waiting. Ambush, chaos, gunfire echoed like thunder. Jax's squadron was outnumbered. One by one, his comrades fell, but he pushed forward, because turning back meant losing everything. Mara's team reached the core, the place where the ship's power pulsed like a living thing. They planted charges, but the timer was short. Outside, the fight raged. Jax faced the final wave. The sky was a storm of fire and smoke. The moment the charges detonated, the Oblivion shuddered. Fire raced through its hull. The ship began to break apart. Jax called for extraction, but the ship was collapsing. No way out. In the final moments, he sent one message. Not a command, not a cry for help. A promise. We burn so the world can live. The Oblivion exploded in a blaze that could be seen from Earth. A beacon, a last ember of defiance. The war was far from over, but the tide had turned. We had shown the universe what it meant to be human, to fight when all seemed lost, to hold on to that ember of hope, and to let it blaze into a fire no darkness could ever snuff out. When the last ember burns, it's easy to think the fire is out, that everything's lost. But embers don't just fade. They wait. They smolder. They carry the promise of a blaze no darkness can hold down. After the Oblivion shattered across the stars, Earth didn't just breathe a sigh of relief. We ignited, because that final strike wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The Ash Pact grew stronger, fiercer. No longer scattered fighters and broken cities. No longer whispers in the dark. We became a force, relentless, united, unstoppable. Mara Voss returned to the front lines. Her presence was a spark, a beacon. She moved through the ruins like a ghost of hope, stitching together the shattered pieces of humanity. But the Vrexel were not finished. They launched one last assault, the kind of attack that tried to crush not just our bodies, but our very will. Worlds burned, families torn apart, dreams shattered. Yet, in that darkness, something unexpected happened. We found strength, not in weapons, not in technology, but in each other. Communities rose. Strangers became brothers. Mothers became warriors. Children became legends. It was a war of everything, of hearts, of minds, of souls. In the final battle, the skies over Earth cracked with fire. The ground shook with fury, but humanity stood tall, unbroken. Jax Harper's last message echoed through the communication networks. We burn so the world can live. Those words became our anthem. The fight was brutal, painful, heartbreaking, but every scar told a story. Every loss forged our resolve. And then, as dawn crept over the horizon, the impossible happened. The Vrexel fleets began to retreat. Their ships limped away like wounded beasts. It wasn't just a victory of arms. It was a victory of spirit. Because the Vrexel never understood one thing about us. We don't quit. We don't surrender. We don't break. We fight because every ember of humanity holds a flame, a fire that no enemy can ever fully extinguish. And when that fire rises, it becomes a blaze, a force of nature, a reminder that no matter how dark the night, the dawn always comes. So here we stand, on the edge of a new world, scarred, tired, but alive, and stronger than ever. This war changed us, but it didn't define us. Because humanity isn't just a species. We're a story, a legend, a testament to the unbreakable. And as the stars watch us from above, one thing is clear. We are not finished, not by a long shot. The ember has risen, and the fire? It's just getting started.